Jake Morrison had been staring at the same screen for 6 hours straight. His eyes burned and his coffee had gone cold long ago, but he could not look away. The signal was there, buried deep in the cosmic noise, but it was real. He rubbed his tired eyes and looked around the communications bay of Earth's defense station Luna. The night shift was always quiet, with only 3 other people working the massive array of listening posts that watched the stars. Most nights nothing happened. Ships came and went from Earth. Mining operations reported their daily status. And the deep space monitors picked up nothing but empty silence from the void. Tonight was different. Jake had first noticed the signal 4 hours ago. It was weak, so faint that the computers had almost filtered it out as background noise. But there was a pattern to it, a rhythm that spoke of intelligence behind the transmission. He had run every test he could think of, and the results were always the same. This was not natural. Someone, or something, was trying to talk. The signal came from the direction of the constellation Lyra, specifically from a star system the astronomers called Kepler 442. Jake knew that system well from his studies. It was over 1,200 light-years away, far beyond anything humans had ever reached. The signal had been traveling through space for longer than human civilization had existed, but that was impossible. If the signal had left its source 1,200 years ago, then whoever sent it would have done so during Earth's medieval period. How could anyone have known that someday humans would be listening to the stars, unless the signal was much newer than it should be? Jake's hand shook as he reached for his communicator. He needed help, and he needed it now. The first person he called was Dr. Lisa Chen, the station's expert on alien languages. I had spent her entire career preparing for this moment, studying every possible way an alien race might try to communicate. If anyone could make sense of this signal, it would be her. Lisa arrived within minutes, still wearing her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on lab coat. Her black hair was messy from sleep, but her eyes were wide and alert. She took one look at Jake's screen, and her face went pale. "This is it," she whispered. "This is really it, isn't it?" Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to stay steady. Together, they began the careful work of cleaning up the signal, removing the interference and noise that had accumulated during its long journey through space. As they worked, more people began to arrive. Pete Williams, the senior communications officer, came first. Then came Dr. Sam Roberts from the science department, followed by Captain Amy Foster, who commanded the defense station's small fleet of patrol ships. Word spread quickly through the station. By dawn, Admiral Roy Davis himself had arrived from Earth, bringing with him a team of the best scientists and military leaders humanity had to offer. The communications bay, normally quiet and empty, now buzzed with activity as dozens of experts worked to decode the mysterious signal. It took 3 days of constant work before they achieved their first breakthrough. Lisa had been running the signal through translation programs when she noticed something strange. Parts of the transmission repeated in regular patterns, like a heartbeat or breathing. When she isolated these sections and played them back, they sounded almost like speech. "It was definitely a language," she announced to the crowded room. "But it's unlike anything we've ever heard. The syntax is completely alien, and they're using frequencies that human vocal cords could never produce. But there's structure here, grammar and meaning." Admiral Davis, a tall man with gray hair and worried eyes, leaned forward in his chair. "How long until you can translate it?" Lisa shook her head. "I don't know. Without any reference point, without knowing anything about the beings who sent this, it could take months or even years. All I can say for certain is that this is definitely an attempt at communication." But Jake had an idea. He had been thinking about the signal's impossible age, about how it seemed to have traveled faster than light itself. What if it had not traveled through normal space at all? What if these aliens had found the same kind of faster-than-light communication that humans were just beginning to experiment with? He shared his theory with the group, and within hours, they had confirmed it. The signal had not been traveling for 1,200 years, was less than 3 years old, sent through some kind of subspace transmission that allowed it to cross vast distances almost instantly. Whoever had sent it was still alive, and they had sent their message recently. This changed everything. The urgency in the room was obvious as Lisa and her team worked around the clock to crack the alien language. They made progress slowly, identifying individual words and concepts. The aliens seemed to use a lot of water-related terms, suggesting they might live in oceans or lakes. They also used words that seemed to relate to fear, danger, and desperation. On the fifth day, Lisa made the discovery that would change human history forever. She had been working on a section of the transmission that repeated more often than others, thinking it might be important. When she finally decoded it, she stood up so quickly that her chair fell over. "It's a distress call," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're asking for help." The room fell silent. Everyone stared at Lisa as she continued to work, translating more and more of the message. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The aliens called themselves the Villani, and they were dying. Something called the Swarm had invaded their star system, destroying planet after planet and killing or capturing everyone they found. The Villani were peaceful people who had never developed strong weapons or large armies. They had tried to fight back, but they were losing badly. Their message was a desperate plea sent out to anyone who might be listening. They did not know if other intelligent life existed in the galaxy, but they had to try. Their civilization was ending, and this distress call was their last hope. As Lisa read the translation aloud, Admiral Davis felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on his shoulders. Earth had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. The journey to Kepler 442 would take months and require almost every ship in the human fleet. Earth would be left defenseless. But in that crowded communications bay, surrounded by the best and brightest humanity had to offer, Roy Davis knew what they had to do. Somewhere in the darkness between the stars, people were dying and calling for help. And humanity, for all its faults, had never been able to ignore a cry for help. The debate would rage for days. Politicians and generals would argue about the risks and the costs. But Jake Morrison, sitting at his console where it all began, already knew how it would end. Humans had always been willing to risk everything for strangers in need. This time would be no different. 6 months had passed since the decision was made. Admiral Roy Davis stood on the bridge of the battleship Endeavour and watched as the stars suddenly stopped moving. The long journey through hyperspace was over. They had arrived at the Kepler 442 system, 1,200 light-years from Earth. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Captain Amy Foster was the first to speak. She stood at the sensor station, her face pale as she read the data streaming across her screen. "Admiral, I'm reading massive energy signatures throughout the system. And sir, 3 of the 5 planets show no life signs at all." Roy walked to her station and looked at the display. The planets closest to the star were nothing but dead rocks now. Where forests and oceans should have been, there was only bare stone and poisoned atmosphere. Whatever the swarm was, they had turned living worlds into lifeless husks. "What about the other 2 planets?" Roy asked. Amy's fingers moved across her controls. "The 4th planet shows some activity, but it's all wrong. Atmosphere is thick, with some kind of biological matter. And the 5th planet, that's Aquatica, the Villani homeworld." Roy felt his heart sink as the image of Aquatica appeared on the main screen. The planet, that should have been blue and green, was now a sickly yellow color. The oceans that the Villani called home had been turned into something else, something that made Roy's stomach turn just looking at it. "Sir," called out Commander Rick Barnes from his position at the helm, "I'm detecting ships throughout the system. Lots of them. They're not like anything in our database." The tactical display lit up with red dots as the human sensors found the enemy fleet. The ships were enormous, each one the size of a small city, but they did not look like ships at all. They looked alive, with hulls that pulsed and moved like beating hearts. Strange tendrils extended from their sides, and their surfaces were covered in what looked like organic armor. Roy had seen many things in his 40 years of military service, but nothing had prepared him for this. The swarm ships were nightmare creatures that belonged in a horror story, not in the cold vacuum of space. "How many ships are we looking at?" he asked. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison, who had insisted on joining the mission, worked at his communication station. "I count at least 50 major vessels, sir. There are hundreds of smaller craft moving between them. Looks like they're mining operations or transport ships." Roy nodded grimly. The human fleet consisted of only 12 ships, including 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, 2 supply vessels, and the Endeavour herself. They were outnumbered 5-1, and that was assuming the alien bioships were not more powerful than human vessels. "Sir," Amy said quietly, "I'm picking up a weak signal from Aquatica. It's coming from the northern continent. The Villani might still be alive down there." Roy felt a spark of hope. They had not come all this way just to find empty worlds and dead civilizations. Somewhere on that poisoned planet, the people who had sent that desperate cry for help were still fighting for their lives. "Set course for Aquatica," Roy ordered. "But keep us hidden behind the asteroid belt. We need to get a better look at what we're dealing with before we make our move." The Endeavour moved carefully through the outer system, using the rocks and debris to hide from the swarm ships. As they got closer to the Villani homeworld, the true scope of the disaster became clear. Massive bioships hung in orbit above the planet's major cities. Smaller craft moved constantly between the ships and the surface. Carrying unknown cargo, Amy launched a stealth probe to get closer readings of the planet's surface. What it found was heartbreaking. The great Villani cities that had once thrived beneath the waves were now surrounded by some kind of organic growth. The water itself had been changed, turned into a thick soup that supported strange new life forms. But the probe also found something else. Hidden in the deep ocean trenches of the northern continent, there were still pockets of clean water. In those pockets, there were signs of Villani life. Somehow, some of them had survived. "Captain Foster," Roy said, "I want you to take the silent running and get closer to the planet. We need to know exactly what we're dealing with down there." Amy nodded and left the bridge with her team. Silent running was their newest stealth ship, designed to avoid detection even at close range. If anyone could get close enough to see what was happening on Aquatica, it would be her. While Amy was gone, Roy gathered his senior staff in the war room. The news was not good. Chief Engineer Kate Sullivan had been studying the bioships from a distance, and what she had learned was disturbing. "These ships are not just alive," Kate explained, pointing to the images on the display. "They're learning. Every time one of our sensor sweeps touches them, they adapt. Their hulls change slightly, becoming better at deflecting our scans. If they can do that with passive sensors, imagine what they might do when we start shooting at them." Lieutenant Colonel Ben Taylor, the commander of the fleet's Marines, leaned forward in his chair. "Are you saying our weapons won't work?" Kate shook her head. "I'm saying they'll work once. Maybe twice if we're lucky. But after that, the swarm will adapt. Will develop defenses against whatever we throw at them." And Roy felt the weight of command pressing down on him. He had brought 12 ships and 10,000 people across the galaxy to help strangers in need. But it was beginning to look like they had walked into a trap that would destroy them all. Dr. Lisa Chen, who had also joined the mission to study the Villani language, spoke up from her seat at the end of the table. "I've been analyzing the new transmissions from the planet. The Villani are definitely still alive, but they're running out of time. From what I can understand, they've retreated to underwater cities in the deepest parts of their oceans. But the swarm is slowly poisoning even those refuges." "How long do they have?" Roy asked. Lisa's face was grim. "Maybe weeks. Maybe days. The swarm isn't just trying to kill them. They're trying to capture them. The Villani keep talking about their people being taken, changed somehow. I think the swarm is using captured Villani to help them convert the planet."
Oh.
Jake looked up from his station. "Sir, I'm receiving a transmission from Captain Foster." Amy's voice filled the war room, distorted by static, but clearly worried. "Admiral, you need to see this. I'm sending you the data now, but sir, it's bad. The swarm isn't just conquering this system. They're using it as a factory." The images that appeared on the screen made everyone in the room go silent. The bioships were not just mining the dead planets. They were growing new ships from the organic matter they had harvested. Worse, they were using captured Villani as part of the construction process, turning living beings into components for their fleet. Roy stood up slowly, his mind racing. The situation was even worse than they had thought. The swarm was not just an invading army. They were a plague that consumed everything in their path and used it to make themselves stronger. But somewhere in the poisoned oceans of Aquatica, the Volani were still fighting. They had held out for 3 years against impossible odds, waiting for help that might never come. Now help had arrived. 12 human ships against an enemy that could adapt to any weapon and seemed to grow stronger with every victory. The smart thing to do would be to retreat, to return to Earth and warn humanity about this threat. But Roy Davis had not come 1,200 light-years to make the smart choice. He had come to answer a cry for help. "All ships," he said into his communicator, "prepare for battle." The Battle of Aquatica began at exactly 0800 hours ship time. Admiral Roy Davis had divided his small fleet into 2 groups, knowing that their only chance was to confuse the enemy and strike fast before the swarm could adapt to human weapons. The heavy cruiser Iron Will led the first attack group, charging straight at the largest cluster of bioships orbiting Aquatica. Captain Steve Miller pushed his ship's engines to their maximum, knowing that speed and surprise were their only advantages. Behind him, 3 destroyers followed in tight formation, their weapons charging for the first strike at the same time. Captain Amy Foster took the Silent Running and 2 other stealth ships toward the planet's surface. Her mission was simple but dangerous: get through the swarm's defenses and land Colonel Ben Taylor's Marines near the Volani survivors. The first exchange of fire was devastating. Human kinetic cannons and nuclear missiles struck the bioships with tremendous force, tearing huge holes in their living hulls. For a moment, it looked like the human weapons were more effective than anyone had dared hope, but the swarm adapted quickly. Within minutes of the first attack, the bioships began to change. Their holes grew thicker and harder where the human weapons had struck. Strange organic armor spread across their surfaces, and new weapon systems emerged from their sides like growing tumors. "Sir," called out Jake Morrison from his position. "On the Endeavor's bridge, the enemy ships are modifying themselves in real time. Our weapons are becoming less effective with each shot." Roy watched the tactical display with growing concern. The Iron Will was taking heavy fire from weapons that had not existed moments before. The bioships were learning from each human attack and developing counters faster than anyone had thought possible. "All ships switch to rotating weapon frequencies," Roy ordered. "Don't give them time to adapt to any single system." But even as the human fleet tried new tactics, the swarm continued to evolve. Their bioships began working together in ways that defied human understanding, sharing information and adaptations across their entire fleet. What one ship learned, they all learned within seconds. On the planet's surface, Amy Foster was having her own problems. The atmosphere above Aquatica was thick with flying creatures that seemed to be part of the swarm. They were not ships in any normal sense, but living beings the size of fighter jets with natural weapons that could punch through armor plating. "On," Amy shouted to her passengers as she dove toward the planet's surface. The Silent Running shook violently as swarm flyers attacked from all sides. Behind her, she could see that one of the other stealth ships had been overwhelmed and was going down in flames. Colonel Taylor and his Marines were strapped into their seats in the cargo bay, fully armed and ready for the fight of their lives. They had trained for years for first contact with an alien species, but nothing had prepared them for this nightmare scenario. The Silent Running crashed through the thick clouds and emerged over the poisoned oceans of Aquatica. What Amy saw below made her stomach turn. The water was no longer blue but a sickly green color, and strange growths floated on the surface like islands of corrupted flesh. "There," shouted Dr. Lisa Chen, pointing toward a section of ocean that looked slightly cleaner than the rest. "The Volani transmissions are coming from underwater cities in that area." Amy pushed the ship into a steep dive, racing toward the coordinates, while swarm flyers continued their attack. The Silent Running's shields flared and sparked as organic weapons struck the hull again and again. They made it to the surface and dove beneath. The poisoned waves, just as the ship's shields finally collapsed. Amy brought them down toward a massive underwater structure that looked like it had been grown rather than built. Strange lights flickered in the deep water. Amy could see movement in the windows of the alien city. The Silent Running touched down on a landing platform that seemed to recognize their ship as friendly. Within seconds, the platform began to move, carrying them down into the city's depths where they would be protected from the swarm. Creatures above, Colonel Taylor and his Marines were the first humans to step foot on an alien world. They found themselves in a vast underwater chamber filled with beings unlike anything they had ever seen. The Villani were roughly human-sized, but covered in smooth amphibious skin that changed color as they moved. They had large eyes adapted for underwater vision and hands with webbed fingers that ended in delicate manipulator appendages. But what struck the humans most was how afraid the Villani looked. These were not the proud alien warriors of science fiction stories. They were refugees, survivors of a war they had never wanted and could not win. The leader of the Villani survivors approached Colonel Taylor slowly, making soft sounds that Dr. Chen recognized as their language. She had brought a translation device. Based on her months of work decoding their transmissions, "Welcome, sky swimmers," the device translated. "We are Quithvelmer, speaker for the last cities of our people. We did not dare hope that our call would be answered." Taylor removed his helmet and bowed respectfully. "We're here to help. Can you tell us how many of your people are still alive?" The answer was heartbreaking. The billions of Villani who had once lived on Aquatica, fewer than 1 million remained. They had survived by retreating to the deepest parts of their oceans, places where the swarm's corruption had not yet reached. But even these refuges were failing as the enemy's influence slowly spread through the planet's ecosystem. Worse. Quithvelmer explained something that made the humans' blood run cold. The swarm did not simply kill their enemies. They captured them and changed them, turning living beings into weapons for their army. Many Villani had been taken and transformed into creatures that fought against their own people. "We have seen our children turned into monsters," Quithvelmer said through the translator. "They keep their minds, but cannot control their bodies. They beg us to end their suffering even as they attack us." Dr. Chen worked frantically to learn more about the swarm, while Colonel Taylor organized the defense of the underwater city. What she discovered was terrifying. The swarm was not just a military force. They were a biological plague that consumed entire ecosystems and used them to create more soldiers. But there was something else, something that gave her hope. The Villani had a unique connection to their planet's ecosystem. They could communicate with all living things on Aquatica through a kind of natural neural network. This was what the swarm really wanted. They were trying to capture and corrupt this network to turn the entire planet into a massive biological computer. Meanwhile, in space above them, the battle continued to rage. The human fleet was fighting bravely, but they were losing. Ship after ship fell to the adapting bioweapons of the swarm. The Iron Will was badly damaged, and 2 of the destroyers had been destroyed completely. Admiral Davis faced the hardest decision of his military career. His fleet was outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that learned from every attack. The smart thing to do would be to retreat while they still could, to return to Earth and warn humanity about this threat. But on the planet below, people were fighting alongside alien refugees who had called out across the galaxy for help. The Villani had waited 3 years for someone to answer their distress call. How could he abandon them now? The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Steve Miller, commander of the badly damaged Iron Will, sent a message that would become legend among humanity's military forces. "Admiral," his voice crackled over the radio, "the swarm ships pause when we do something they don't expect. They can adapt to our weapons, but they can't adapt to our courage. Permission to show them what humans do best, sir?" Roy Davis knew what Miller was asking. Closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of the families these brave men and women had left behind on Earth. Then he opened them and gave the order that would change the course of the battle. "Permission granted, Captain. Show them what we're made of." The Iron Will turned toward the largest swarm bioship and accelerated to ramming speed. What happened next would be remembered as the moment when humanity showed the galaxy what made them different from every other species among the stars. Captain Steve Miller closed his eyes for a moment as the Iron Will accelerated toward the massive swarm bioship. His crew had evacuated to the escape pods, but he had stayed behind to guide the ship on its final mission. Around him, the bridge. was empty except for the hum of engines pushing beyond their safety limits. "For Earth," he whispered, and slammed his ship into the bioship's central mass. The explosion lit up the space around Aquatica like a new star. The swarm bioship, larger than a city, broke apart under the impact. Chunks of organic matter drifted through space as secondary explosions rippled through its hull, but more importantly, something else happened. For the first time since the battle began, the other swarm ships stopped moving. Admiral Roy Davis watched from the bridge of the Endeavour as the enemy fleet hung motionless in space. Their bioships had been adapting and learning from every human attack, but Captain Miller's sacrifice had done something they could not understand or counter. The concept of willing self-destruction to help others was completely foreign to the swarm's collective mind. "All ships attack now while they're confused," Roy ordered. The remaining human vessels opened fire with everything they had. Nuclear missiles and kinetic rounds struck the motionless bioships before they could adapt their defenses. For precious minutes, the human fleet had the advantage they needed. But on the planet below, Dr. Lisa Chen was making a discovery that would change everything. Working with the Volani scientists in their underwater city, she had been studying how the swarm's neural network functioned. What she found gave her both hope and a terrible idea. "Colonel Taylor," she called out, running toward the Marine commander. "I need to talk to Admiral Davis immediately. I think I know how we can win this war." Taylor activated his communication device, linking Dr. Chen directly to the fleet command. Her voice was shaky with excitement and fear as she explained her discovery. "Admiral, the swarm operates as a hive mind. Every bioship, every converted creature, they're all connected through a biological neural network. But I've discovered something crucial. Human brain patterns are completely incompatible with their system." Roy listened carefully as Dr. Chen continued. "The swarm can't convert humans. Our neural structure is too different. But more than that, if humans were to be captured and brought into their network, our thought patterns would disrupt their entire system." The implications of what she was saying slowly became clear to everyone listening. Roy felt his stomach drop as he realized what Dr. Chen was suggesting. "You're talking about allowing ourselves to be captured," he said quietly. "Not just captured," Dr. Chen replied. "We need to get inside their conversion ships and let them try to assimilate us. Human memories and emotions would act like a virus in their network. The concepts of individual choice, love, and sacrifice would overload their collective consciousness." Colonel Taylor shook his head. "Doctor, you're talking about a suicide mission. Even if your theory is correct, whoever volunteers for this won't be coming back." "I know," Dr. Chen said. "But it might be the only way to save both the Volani and humanity. If we don't stop the swarm here, they'll eventually find Earth. And when they do, they'll have absorbed everything they learned from fighting us." Captain Amy Foster, who had been listening from the silent running, was the first to volunteer. "I'll do it," she said simply. "My ship is already damaged, and we're surrounded by swarm flyers. If anyone's going to be captured, it might as well be us, Captain." "No," Admiral Davis said. "I can't order anyone to do this." "You're not ordering me, sir," Amy replied. "I'm volunteering. We all are." One by one, voices came over the communication network. Marines, engineers, pilots, and scientists. All volunteered for the mission that would almost certainly cost them their lives. They understood what Dr. Chen was asking, and they were willing to pay the price to save both species. Roy Davis felt tears running down his face as he listened. To his people volunteer for certain death. These were the best humanity had to offer, and they were willing to sacrifice everything for strangers they had never met. All volunteers. "This is Admiral Davis," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am honored to serve with each and every one of you. If Dr. Chen is right, what you're about to do will save millions of lives. If she's wrong, you'll die for nothing. But either way, you'll die as heroes." Captain Foster's plan was simple, but dangerous. She would allow her damaged ship to be captured by a swarm bioship. Once inside, she and her volunteers would not resist the conversion process. Instead, they would embrace it, flooding the swarm network with human thoughts and memories. The silent running emerged from the underwater city and immediately came under attack by swarm flyers. Amy did not try to fight back or escape. Instead, she allowed her ship to be disabled and captured. Biotentacles wrapped around the human vessel and pulled it into the belly of a massive conversion ship. What happened next was unlike anything the swarm had ever experienced. As they attempted to assimilate the human volunteers, the bioship's neural network was flooded with memories of human love, sacrifice, and individual choice. Amy Foster's memories of her first day at the military academy mixed with those of Marine Sergeant Tony Clark thinking about his daughter back on Earth. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the swarm. Their hive mind, built around collective consumption and survival, could not process the concept of willing self-sacrifice for others. The network that connected all swarm forces began to fracture as human emotions spread like wildfire through their consciousness. Across the star system, bioships began to shut down as their crews experienced something they had never felt before: individual thoughts and feelings. Converted Villani suddenly found their own minds returning as the swarm's control over them weakened. On Aquatica, the corrupted ocean began to clear as the biological agents that had poisoned it lost their connection to the collective. In the underwater cities, Villani survivors watched in amazement as their planet began to heal itself, but the victory came at a terrible cost. Of the 10,000 humans who had answered the Villani distress call, fewer than 2,000 survived the battle. 12 ships had been reduced to 3. Hundreds of Earth's best and brightest had given their lives for strangers they had never met. Admiral Davis stood on the bridge of the badly damaged Endeavour and watched as swarm bioships drifted lifeless. Through space, they had won, but the price had been almost too high to bear. 3 months later, surviving human ships began their journey back to Earth, but they did not travel alone. Thousands of Villani survivors joined them, carrying with them advanced biological technologies that would revolutionize human medicine and agriculture. More importantly, they carried the story of what humanity had done, the tale of the species that had traveled 1,200 light-years to answer a cry for help spread throughout the galaxy. Other civilizations that had received the Villani distress, signal but chosen to ignore it now, looked at humanity with a mixture of awe and shame. When the human fleet finally reached Earth, they brought with them more than just survivors and new technology. They brought a new mission for humanity among the stars. Admiral Davis stood before the United Earth Council and delivered a message that would define humanity's role in the galaxy for generations to come. "We have learned that we are not alone among the stars," he said. "We have also learned that there are forces of darkness that would consume everything in their path. But we have proven that courage, sacrifice, and compassion are more powerful than any weapon." He paused, looking out at the faces of Earth's leaders, proposed that we send a new message to the galaxy, not asking for help, but offering it. Let every species know that if they face extinction or oppression, they need only call out and humanity will answer. The proposal was approved unanimously. Within days, a new signal was broadcast from Earth to every corner of the galaxy. The message was simple, but powerful. You are not alone. Hey, we are coming. And across the vast darkness of space, other voices began to answer back. Species that had hidden in fear for centuries began to emerge, knowing that somewhere among the stars, there were people willing to risk everything to help strangers in need. Humanity had found its purpose in the galaxy. They would be the ones who answered the call when others needed help. They would be the light in the darkness, the hope for those who had none. The age of human expansion had begun. It's not through conquest or colonization, but through compassion and sacrifice. And the galaxy would never be the same.